It's time for episode 72 of The Crisis Show here on Google Hangouts and on YouTube and wherever else you have this link around the world, including Twitter. Good evening. My name is Rich Klein. I'm president of Rich Klein Crisis Management in New York, founder and host of The Crisis Show. I'm also the Crisis Management Advisor on Google Helpouts. Tonight, we talk about public apologies, and the hook is, of course, Donald Sterling, the embattled owner of the Los Angeles Clippers. I don't have to tell you what he said. The whole world knows. Been a media saturation. But Sterling is not the first person to attempt to apologize, and certainly he won't be the last public figure to do so in words and deeds. And so we're going to talk about that and more tonight. For those of you watching, if you're a CEO or an executive of a company or organization, you need to understand how to apologize sincerely and without making excuses. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm so thrilled to have a newcomer to the show, but someone who really knows the subject. He's a professor at Southern Oregon University, Edwin Battistella, who has a new book out about public apologies. So welcome to the show, Ed. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Rich. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. I'm glad we connected late today. That's the beauty of the show. I can call somebody up late in the day and say, are you available? So this is great. So talk to me, first of all, about how you got the idea for the book. And you're a professor of English, of course, at Southern Oregon. Tell me about your work before the book and how you came to think that this would be a good book to write.
Sure. I'm over here in Ashland, Oregon, about 13 miles from the California border. It's still light outside, you can see. And I've been, my background's in linguistics. I was actually a graduate student at the City University of New York in the 1970s, and have worked on language attitudes, the history of the study of English grammar, and so on. But I've always had an interest in public language and apology. Years ago, a friend of mine was working in advertising in New York, and he wrote a direct mail piece that he had to do an apology for. And we got together and sort of came up with some ideas, and ever since then I've been just sort of following public apologies. A couple of years ago, I got interested in just how bad some of the public apologies, especially by politicians, were. And I put together a book proposal to my publisher, Oxford University Press, and worked with some editors there to come up with a way to make the linguistics and the sociology accessible to a lot of folks. And we came up with this book, Sorry About That, The Language of Public Apology, which will be out in just a few days.
Oh, so our timing's perfect, and it's already live on Amazon for our viewers out there who want to take a look at it, and we'll add it to our show notes after the show, so you guys can click on that. And you, by the way, you've gotten some great. I mean, I've done a lot of publicity in my life, so you've done a great job of promoting the book. Interview with CNN earlier today. Talk to us about that, because it looks like you did an interview with CNN, and you, with of course the hook being Donald Sterling, but you looked at other apologies, if you will, Paula Deen, and you and I talked about that before the show, and other people, and you grade them. So talk to us about the grading system. What do you look at when you in that grading system?
I talked with Katie Steinmetz, a great writer for Time and CNN, and she interviewed me yesterday, and we decided to talk about Donald Sterling, but also some other apologies that were sort of the same genre. And you know, the things that I look for in an apology is there some level of sincerity? Does the person actually say what they did wrong? So if you remember growing up, your mother or father probably told you when you apologize, you have to say what you did wrong and that you're sorry for it.
Right.
And so if someone does that, they get a certain number of points if they can do that well. It's also important to use the right language. So it's easy to use a kind of conditional, if apology, if anyone was offended, I'm sorry, sort of thing. And that's really a kind of passive-aggressive, throw it back to the person who is offended, and it puts the burden on them to really say something. The other thing I look for is whether people distance themselves from what they did. Can they actually name the harm they did? And there was a great one by an Oregon politician a few years ago where he was pressed by a reporter, and all he could manage to say was, "I apologize for the conduct that it was alleged I did. That's what I'm apologizing for."
Yep. Yeah.
Just couldn't even name what he was trying to apologize for.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Those are some of the things I look for.
Good. Well, I appreciate that. So what I want to do now is show our viewers, and I know you've seen this clip. I want to play this clip of this Anderson Cooper interview with Donald Sterling, and then we'll talk about we'll take it apart, if you will, and in a more detailed way. So let me pull that up for our viewers. Take a second here to pull it up, and I'm not gonna play the whole thing, obviously, but there's some interesting parts here. So here we go.
I'm a good member who made a mistake. I'm a good member who made a mistake, and I'm apologizing, and I'm asking for forgiveness. Am I entitled to one mistake? Am I, after 35 years? I mean, I love my league. I love my partner. Am I entitled to one mistake? It's a terrible mistake, and I'll never do it again.
The vice president of the NBA Players Association, Roger Mason, he said that the players won't accept anyone in the Sterling family owning the Clippers. Not you, not your wife, not your son-in-law, not your daughter. Do you believe that?
I really don't know. The people that are going to decide my fate, I think, are not the media and not the Players Union, but the NBA.
The owners.
Pardon me?
The owners.
The owners. If the owners feel I deserve another chance, then they'll give it to me.
But there is a path for you to fight their decision, isn't there?
Of course. But if you fight with my partners.
Yeah, I just want to. I think that was just as more excerpts, but I just want to pull up another clip that had more of the apology part. Let me just pull it up quickly.
Sure.
Are we here? Yeah, I thought I had the full clip there, but it's not coming up. And anyway, while I'm doing that, talk to our viewers about what you saw on that video, that interview.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I noticed is that he says, "I just made one mistake." He never really says what the mistake is. So, if he was being sort of ethically serious about it, he would really kind of explore the mistake and why it's wrong to use this kind of language. But he just sort of characterizes it as a mistake, and as one mistake. Can't you forgive me for one mistake? It's really what he needs to do is say what he did wrong, why it was wrong, and ideally what he's going to do different in the future. And he really doesn't do that. He just goes right from, "I made a mistake, can't you forgive me?"
Yeah, one of the things that struck me as well, and I've talked about this, we did a show last year on Paula Deen. I know you and I have talked about that as well. We'll get to that one. But when you say things like, "She baited me, she set me up, I really don't feel that way," it wasn't heartfelt. It was just, "Oh, feel sorry for me. I'm just an 80-year-old demented man." That was my takeaway.
Exactly. This is the other thing that if you're going to apologize, you can explain a little bit, but there's a point where explanation drifts into excuses and justification and blame shifting. And I know from your work in crisis communication, you know that that's the one thing that a corporation or a CEO should never do. Don't shift the blame to the employees or the customer or anything like that. If you did something wrong, say what it was. He does a lot of, "I was baited, I was set up, I was trying to impress a girl, I'm a foolish old man" kind of stuff. So it really becomes insincere and totally ineffective, I think.
Yeah, a couple of points I want to add to that, and thank you for that. I want to just add a few things that I observed with this. First of all, the reason we're doing a show about this because we're trying to educate, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, executives about how to do this right, obviously. And the first thing that was done wrong was even if you can call this an apology, whatever you want to call it, it came 2 weeks later, whatever the time frame was, way too late in today's world of fast-moving information and social media. You can't let the public talk about you and not defend yourself and wait two weeks or 3 weeks, even if it's with Anderson Cooper and you're going to be seen by millions of people. The damage to your reputation has already been done. So you really have to get at that very quickly to make a statement. And you have to get it right, and you have to not only do it once and walk away from it, because people are going to find you today on different channels, literally and figuratively. They're going to, if they didn't watch CNN, they didn't hear the apology necessarily, or they didn't read about it in the newspaper. So you have to be in many places. And so my advice to executives at their companies is to make sure you have your statement prepared for a wide variety of outlets, media outlets and social media, long before you have a problem. And so for companies that are worried about the one bad apple syndrome I talked about, because in this case, it was an owner, but for many companies and many people watching the show, it could be an employee, a high-ranking employee who makes a statement like this and harms the reputation of your organization. And so you have to be prepared for that. So I want to leave people with that thought. The other thing I wanted to do now, Ed, is contrast or talk about Paula Deen, because I think you and I agree there were some parallels here with Paula Deen's situation in 2013. So I want to play that clip. That clip I do have here from her apology. Let's take a look at this.
Okay.
Before using his Bank America
No, wait for the ad to go.
credit card to cook up some fun with friends, Norm earned 1% cash back everywhere, every time. 2% at the grocery store and 3% on gas. Apply today.
From the seemingly racist, how does 2013
single your public apology?
I'm sorry, the clips that were showing up before are now changed. I'm going to find it, though.
That's modern technology for you.
Well, you know, it said play and it had a picture, and now it's changed up on me. Let's see if I can pull it up here just by fast forwarding. No, that's not happening either. All right.
Yeah, I do remember the clip pretty well.
Hold on a second.
But this is Guy's Grocery
Hold on a
Games.
second.
Push
Let me get rid of this.
Shop is cooked fast. This game show, finding ingredients won't be.
My apology. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I do remember. I remember the clip very well, and I think one of the things that she did well, I think, was that she actually managed to say what she did wrong. So I gave her some points for that. She talked about inappropriate language that should never be tolerated. So she was a bit more specific than Donald Sterling, who just managed to say that, you know, I made one mistake. She also did a little bit of blame shifting, though, where she talked about how it's part of this was a common way of talking in the Southern culture that she grew up in.
Right.
So it kind of shifts the blame to a sort of, it's society's fault. Everyone was doing it when I grew up. It's just the way I talk, kind of. I don't know if those were her exact words, but that was the sense I got from it. And I think there was a point also where she talked a little bit too long and began to blame other people for not understanding her. And again, this sort of blaming, you know, for your listeners, it's the equivalent of blaming the customer, blaming the employee. People are not. That doesn't make for an effective apology. The person in charge needs to go out and really take some accountability and say what was wrong, what's going to be different in the future, why it was wrong.
Right. Okay. Let's just
10 years of innovation.
get through the sponsor ad. And, I think I have to pull a D clip now.
And more hybrids on the road than all other luxury automakers combined. Lexus Hybrid Drive is the proven way forward.
Let's try this one. Yeah, I think this will work.
I want to apologize to everybody for the wrong that I've done. I want to learn and grow from this. Inappropriate, hurtful language is totally, totally unacceptable. I've made plenty of mistakes along the way, but I beg you, my children, my team, my fans, my partners, I beg for your forgiveness. Please forgive me for the mistakes that I've made.
So what did you think of that part, that initial apology?
Yeah, it's similar to Sterling's in some ways, the kind of jumping to forgiveness, but she's a little bit more specific about what she did wrong, and she doesn't characterize it as just one mistake and try to move on. So I gave her slightly higher points. She still doesn't quite explore what's wrong with the language, which could, is the sort of thing that is hard for people to do. I mean, it's easy to say I made a mistake. It's hard to say, what's the sort of moral rule I violated. And she comes close to that by talking about inappropriate language that no one should ever use.
Yeah, and that seems to be a pattern that we've seen with a lot of these situations. I also remember in 2006 we had Mel Gibson, and it was also interesting, just from my own memory and just doing a little research today. He has a publicist, like many A-list actors, or not A-list anymore, a former A-list actor. He had his publicist put out a very terse statement that said, "I'm sorry for those who are offended." And by the way, for anybody out there listening, don't ever couch it that way. If you're sorry, you're sorry, right, Ed?
Exactly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna. Mel Gibson actually, he made a big mistake in that initial statement. It was out pretty quickly. It was out the next day, so it was one of those morning after apologies. He apologized very specifically to the police for his behavior, but then he offered this sort of general apology. If I'm sorry to anyone else I offended by anything I did, kind of conditional apology, which was just absolutely the wrong way to go about it. You're exactly right.
Yeah, to his credit, and this certainly had to come from pressure. I'm going to pull this up here. He did make a second apology. I bring this up because what I've noticed is in these situations, as I said earlier, it's not enough to just make one statement and forget about it. So he went. I think he realized, or his handlers realized, that he had to go further. And so the Anti-Defamation League published his formal statement. And here, I'm just going to read a couple of things that he wrote and going to get your feedback. This is August 2006. I'm not just asking for forgiveness. I would like to take it one step further and meet with leaders in the Jewish community with whom I can have a one-on-one discussion to discern the appropriate path for healing. So that, I think, was much better than his initial, I'm sorry if I offended anybody, right?
Yeah, exactly. That was the Anti-Defamation League did a great service there in pushing back against the really poor apology. And I have a section in one of the early chapters on this apology and the role of the people being apologized to in helping to sort of reshape a bad apology. And that's what the Anti-Defamation League and Abraham Foxman did in this case. They really forced Gibson to get much more specific about the moral nature of what he was doing.
Yeah, just a quick disclaimer, just note, I used to be the media relations manager for the ADL from 88 to 91. So I followed them, obviously, since I left there many years ago, and I followed Ed Foxman, and this was something that certainly interested me that they did. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
At the end, the Anti-Defamation League issued a statement, I think, that said, "This is the apology we had hoped for."
And this, right. That's a great point. That's a great point. And that's a role of a civil rights organization, other organizations out there who try to eliminate bigotry. And what we've, it's interesting that Paula Deen and Mel Gibson and Donald Sterling and others, we're dealing with a lot in the last few years of this kind of anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, all these things that are coming out. And these are the ones I think that really hurt people the most and really affects public opinion, right?
Yeah, it is. There are lots of effective apologies that are for very small things, and it's much easier to apologize for something that's a relatively minor offense. I talk about the apology that David Brinkley made to Bill Clinton after the 1996 election. I don't know if you remember that David Brinkley thought he was off the air, and he made some comments about how Bill Clinton was a bore and all that stuff. And Clinton was scheduled to go on This Week with David Brinkley that Sunday. So he showed up, and Brinkley made a nice, sincere apology. And Clinton accepted it on the spot, and everyone was able to move on. But it's a relatively small transgression, and it was handled well. Those are easy to deal with. Things that involve hate in some way are much harder to recover from.
Yeah, just November 1996. Just called that up. Okay, I just want to check that out, make sure I get the timing right. Yeah. So you also wrote a few. You wrote in Politico a few days ago. The art of the political apology, talking about Monica Lewinsky's Vanity Fair piece, excerpts from her article, and she said, "Let me say it again. I myself deeply regret what happened." And I like what you wrote here in your piece. This is from May 7th, and we'll post this too. Let me just see if we can share the screen here as I read it. And before I do that, I wanted to just pick up on something you said. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So what's interesting about what we're talking about the kinds of situations where an apology is necessary, and in this case, this was a situation where she's apologizing for the relationship, but it really didn't hurt a lot of people around the country like a racist statement would be or an anti-Semitic statement would be. It's a different kind of situation, so I just want to point that out. But nonetheless, you thought this was interesting, so let me pull this up. And you write, a truly effective political apology succeeds on two levels. Ethically, by admitting moral wrongdoing and expressing regret, and socially, by making amends with the offended party. So you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that this particularly applies to apologies where there's someone who's been harmed. In this case, for Monica Lewinsky, it's not clear that she did any harm, other than sort of participating in this spectacle that distracted the country from other things for a time.
Right.
So she's right that she regrets what happened, and regret is what we can do if in sort of unfortunate circumstances. If you may regret that the train is late, or that someone isn't in the office at a particular time, and that's a kind of different thing sometimes than being sorry or apologizing. So the example that I like to talk about is when President Kennedy federalized the Arkansas National Guard to integrate the schools. The Alabama National Guard, the Birmingham National Guard. He said he regretted having to do it. So he wasn't apologizing. He was just sort of saying, this is a regrettable situation. And sometimes people will misinterpret regret as apology when it's not intended. Good point.
Good point. So, what other? In your book, you probably have a whole list. I haven't read it yet, of course. I'm going to get my hands on it. But give us a list of other people that you talk about in the book, and maybe if you jog my memory, I can give you some thoughts on it as well.
Yeah, there are 10 chapters, and I've tried to sort of do a little bit on international and national apologies, but a lot of them are between individuals. So one of the ones that comes up fairly early in the same chapter as Mel Gibson, in fact, is the apology that Joe Biden made to Barack Obama when they were both candidates for the presidency in 2008, and Biden said something like, Obama is the
is good looking or something.
Mainstream African American candidate who's bright and clean and articulate, or something along those lines.
Yes.
And he quickly apologized. This is interesting, I thought, because it wasn't a very good apology. It was a bit of a conditional apology to anyone who was offended, and it was a little bit vague about what he did wrong. If he were going to treat it more in a more ethically serious way, he would have explored the idea that, you know, sort of injecting race into the campaign in this casual way wasn't a good thing to do. And but Obama and others accepted the apology fairly quickly, I think, because they had a sort of more or less trusting relationship with Biden, and none of them really wanted to explore the issue further. So it contrasts nicely with the Mel Gibson case, where it was important to explore that further.
Yeah, I'll just quote from this article I pulled up. Obama, the candidate at the time, I didn't take Senator Biden's comments personally, but obviously they were historically inaccurate, Obama said. He goes on, African-American presidential candidates like Jesse Jackson, Shirley Chisholm, Kara Mosley Brown, and Al Sharpton gave a voice to many important issues through their campaigns, and no one would call them inarticulate. So he corrected him, but kind of gently.
Yeah, exactly. And it seems like everything's worked out for them in the long run.
Absolutely has. A very interesting recovery there, I guess.
So the relationship that people have beforehand, and the sort of general regard that someone's held in, is something that seems to make a difference as to whether even if a bad apology is accepted.
Right, right. So yeah, talk to me about some of the others that you cover in the book, others that come to mind.
Now, I've got a few on diplomatic apologies where I talk about the distinction between apologizing and regretting something. We talk about why people sometimes take a long time to apologize. And two of the ones that come up in that chapter are William Calley, the My Lai massacre. He apologized, I think, in 2009, I think. So it was more than 40 years after the events of My Lai took place. So it was sort of clearly something that he didn't feel able to talk about and apologize for before that. Another one is Lee Atwater. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was thinking of Bob McNamara as well.
Yeah.
Vietnam, also interesting.
Yeah, the McNamara wrote his In Retrospect book in the, I guess also in the 2000s, and his was a little bit more, there's a little bit more self-justification in that as well. So it went on a bit too much, and people didn't respond as well to McNamara as he would have liked, I think.
Yeah. So I interrupted. So Lee Atwater.
Well, yeah, Lee Atwater was an interesting case because if you remember, he got brain cancer shortly after George H.W. Bush was elected, and he died midway in that term. Before he died, he made a public apology to Michael Dukakis for some of the things that happened in the 1988 campaign.
Yeah.
So and Dukakis accepted it, I think, largely because it was sincere and really something of a deathbed apology.
Yeah, I know. I remember he died. He was 40 years old. Very sad. But yeah, great point. Political apology. You know, the other thing that comes to mind, Ed, is that, and this is, I wonder what your thoughts are on this. Many of these apologies come about because people get caught. They get caught. We're living in an age of of these, and people are just recording things. You had Mitt Romney caught once with a tape, and now Donald Sterling. People need to assume that everything they say is going to potentially be recorded. So if we have business people out there who think it's just between us or in a closed room, I would bet my money on that, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure you've talked to your clients about the importance of not putting anything in an email that they wouldn't say in public, and even being careful. Facebook, I talk to my students about their Facebook profiles, and they're shocked sometimes that an employer would actually read them, but they do.
Yeah, in fact, it's very interesting you raise that. There are some laws, depending on the state, that allow employees to do that or not do that. It's a very interesting privacy issue, whether they can get access to that and use that against you. So, but I guess my question I wanted to get to was, do people who do you see apologies made before they get caught? And in your book, in your research, did people come forward because of their conscience, or was it most of them, hey, I got caught, now I have to apologize? Is there a thread there at all?
It's, I think often there's some sort of call to apologize, and that's where the person realizes that they did something wrong, and sometimes that comes from within. More often it comes from some push from outside, getting caught, sort of someone telling them that they are exhibiting bad behavior, or things like that. And often what I find is there's a kind of apology two-step where someone will make a quick bad apology, like the first Mel Gibson apology,
Exactly.
and then there's a response from someone who might or might not accept the apology that really and forces them to take it more seriously than they might otherwise.
Yeah, and I would add thanks for that. I would add to that in the last few years, in the days of just print media and broadcast, you could get away with a lot more. People didn't always find out about it. It gets swept under the rug. Yesterday's news was just that. And I think social media like Twitter and Facebook play a large role in this, because the speed with which something can get out of hand in terms of your reputation is so fast today. And that's the challenge I know when I'm dealing with clients. This is what I'm trying to educate them on, that you have to be able to respond to that very quickly. You can't wait to issue a statement even a few days now, because as soon as it goes public in one newspaper or one social media outlet, it's a virus. It just takes off. And if you don't respond quickly and effectively, your reputation's toast. It's very hard to recover, right?
Exactly. And it becomes a major distraction for your organization. And CEOs, I think, are a lot like presidents in that everything they say is taken seriously. And if you remember, there was a situation where Ronald Reagan made a flippant comment about Martin Luther King Jr. There was one where Jimmy Carter made an odd comment about Lyndon Johnson that offended Lady Bird Johnson. And I guess President Obama has made some casual comments about the Special Olympics on The Tonight Show, and also about Nancy Reagan and seances. And they all quickly apologized. And they did it actually by telephoning the person they had offended, which was, I think, a good way to do it, because they could have a private conversation and report it as a clarification and apology, issuing their regrets, without their actual apology words becoming an issue. So that's sometimes a way to approach things like that, kind of misspeaking in public.
Yeah, thanks for that. I would just add to that, what I always tell people on the show and to clients and prospects is that it's not just the words, it's the action. So what you just brought up is a great point. Making that phone call or having a meeting to actually apologize to that person. First of all, it's probably healing to yourself, I imagine, but also it allows that other person to make a public statement, says, yes, I got the phone call, he or she apologized, and we're okay. I accept his or her apology. That's much better than saying, well, I put out a statement and I hope they read it in an impersonal way. So it's not just the words we say, it's the actions to correct the record, to correct a harm that's done. And so I appreciate you reminded me of that, because it really goes to the kind of work we do in this crisis management space. It is the actions, not just the words. They have to work together.
Yeah, exactly. And I have a great example of Woodrow Wilson early on offended his most important patron, who was the editor of Harper's Monthly. And Wilson botched the apology. He sent a sort of tersely worded note that wasn't really an apology, and the editor of Harper's took his endorsement off the masthead and endorsed Wilson's opponent in the next election. They broke completely over this.
Interesting. You know, I wonder in your book if you talk about, because I haven't read it yet, I'm excited to read it now that I found it today. But what is the connect? Was there anything in your book that talked about advice that executives or high-profile individuals get from attorneys? Because in my work, at least, I've found that it's been very hard when you're working with some of the attorneys. Like, don't say anything, don't say I'm sorry, even in the most egregious situations where people have died or been injured. Did you talk about that at all in your book? Any connection anywhere?
Yeah, there's a little bit about that in a couple of situations. One of the ones that strikes me as being particularly poignant was the Ahime Maru sinking, which I think it was in 2001, if I remember correctly. I think it was the first foreign policy crisis for the new Bush administration, and the USS Greenville was on a maneuvers near Hawaii with some dignitaries aboard, and they were doing a surfacing exercise, and they hit a Japanese fishing boat, which was actually part of the high school for fishing students, and killed several students and a couple of teachers. And there was an investigation, and the way that the captain of the boat, Scott Waddell, tells it, the Navy attorneys wanted him to say nothing until everything was settled. Finally, and that didn't satisfy him, and it certainly didn't satisfy the parents of the students who were killed, and the folks in the Japanese prefecture. So after he was retired from the Navy, he actually went to Japan and apologized in person to the survivors and to the families of the others, and that brought a certain amount of closure by being able to do this. But he got the advice that the Navy lawyers felt they needed to give, but it really wasn't satisfying for either the person responsible or for the folks injured.
Yeah, and thanks for that. I would add to that for those of you watching in the corporate world as well, you have to, if you're the face of a company in the most serious situations, you can't just put out an impersonal statement. It has to be a leader behind that statement. So one of the things that I tell clients is to set up a YouTube channel for your company and think about if you have a worst case situation where you have to apologize for something or at least accept responsibility, however you want to frame it, you do it on video, and so it's more compassionate, it's more real to people, rather than just issuing a terse statement that saying you're sorry. In today's world, people are looking for that. We're in a different world now. You can't hide behind a press release. You need to be more out there, more forward, if you want to rebuild reputation and really earn forgiveness from people if you did something wrong, if your company did something wrong. It's really important to do that. So it's just one of the tips I leave people with.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and I think one of the great examples of that is the difference between the apology for the Exxon Valdez, which was an open letter in a bunch of newspapers. It was very short, and the video apology for the BP oil spill that Tony Hayward made, which was a much better apology, I thought, but he went wrong elsewhere. He went wrong later on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you would think that since 1982, I mean, in our world, the Tylenol, the lacing of the Tylenol tablets in Chicago back in '82 is a case study in our business for how to do crisis management right, how to apologize, how to accept responsibility, and do something about it. And the Exxon Valdez on the other side of that is an example of one of the worst crisis management situations in history. So yeah, interesting to put that up.
I think thanks to the kind of work that you're doing and others are doing, some of the corporate apologies are getting a lot better, more sincere, taking more responsibility, and kind of identifying the the things that go wrong without scapegoating or blame shifting. So it's nice to see the improvement since the Exxon Valdez days.
Yeah, it's getting better, but on the one hand, but one of the things that I noticed, Ed, is that because of social media, there are still a lot of companies and organizations that don't know how to respond to public outcries on social media. So either they'll ignore them or they'll put up this, almost like computer speak. Well, thank you for your message, and if you need more information, and it's not even responding to the complaint. And this could be something as big as people getting violently ill on a cruise ship, for example, and not having that person, not having a face behind the company, and not having a compassionate view of what happened and a real apology. So the challenge going forward, and here we are in 2014, the challenge for those of you out there is to, okay, so maybe you get the media relations side of it right, you know how to talk to the media, but now you also have to be concerned, even more so today, with your social media presence. So if you're on social media, you need to use those spaces for those kinds of apologies. So if you do a video on YouTube, you put it on your Facebook and your Twitter, because you don't know what people are going to be looking for you now and in the future. If they even trust your brand down the road, if you're trying to rebuild your reputation, they're going to be looking at that stuff on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, and they're looking at the media stories as well. And I find a lot of companies that they may get it right with the media, but then screw it up with the social media, and it's all got to be integrated today.
Exactly, it's all got to send the same message, and you can't have a sort of sincere YouTube piece and then a sort of flippant Twitter or other social media piece. It really needs to be sending that same message and reinforcing what you've done wrong, what you're going to do differently in the future, and what the harm is.
And that's a great point that you just made, and it's exactly what I would say. You said that beautifully. So thank you for that. Okay, so let me just before we start to wrap up, because it's getting a little late, let me just direct people to the Amazon page where they can get your book. Do you have a hard copy of the book there you can hold up?
I do. I can hold it up.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Well, I'll put it right in front of my face. Sorry about that. The language of public apology.
Can you just raise it so we see the whole? Just like raise it. Yeah. Just go up to the sky. There we go. Beautiful. Now we can see it. Thank you. Yeah. Very nice. Okay. And that's it's out on Amazon now, right? Is it a pre-order? Let's see if we could pull this up for people. That's excellent. Okay, so let me just share a screen here so people can find it. Yeah, here we go. So, okay, so here it is also on Amazon. And that's is there going to be an audio version of this or just text for now?
I'm not sure if there'll be an audio version yet or not, but it's available as an ebook and as a hardcover and hopefully as a paperback someday.
Great. And so yeah, this is great stuff. I'm looking forward to reading it. And let me just pull you back here. I lost myself here. Share screen here.
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what you think when you've read the book. And
yeah, I definitely want to have you on again, obviously, and maybe to join in with some of my other guests who are also well-versed in this space and very interested in this topic. I mean, we talk about this all the time on this show. We've been doing this for almost 2 years now, and we're always looking at, as you've beautifully analyzed tonight, how people communicate, how they say it, and how they back it up with their actions, because that's really where the rubber meets the road, if you will.
Yeah,
so.
Apologies are a kind of renewable resource, so there'll be plenty of opportunities to explore them in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time on short notice, especially, and for getting connected. I really appreciate it. We'll stay in touch. For our viewers, www.thecrisisshow.com. Eventually, we'll get this video on that site with some show notes and a link to Edwin's new book. Again, Ed, thank you so much.
Thank you, Rich.
Pleasure having you. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you to our viewers. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.